I know there's a bunch of cyberpunk derivatives video out there already, and some of you might wonder, what am I doing here? But to my defense, and to save you some time, here's what's going to be in this video. I'm going to talk about the origins, meanings, examples of movies, anime, or games of 5 main cyberpunk genres, as well as some brief explanation of other less popular types. And I'll also explain how they differ from one another, especially those that seem very similar, like how Atompunk differ from Raypunk or Steampunk versus Clockpunk. Let's start with the beginning of it all, Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is a sci-fi dystopian world with super high-tech but low life. It's typically filled with capitalism and mega corporation. The world is dominated by computer technology. The term was first coined by Bruce Becky for his short story Cyberpunk in 1983. If you're wondering if the term has anything to do with punk or not, Bruce Becky combining the word cybernetics and the word punk from the punk youth culture, though he didn't explicitly or intentionally incorporate all the punk values into the genre. I also compared the similarities between cyberpunk and punk in one of my previous videos. After Bruce Becky coined the term then became more popular with the works of other writers like William Gibson in his work Neuromancer, published in 1984, Islands in the Net by Bruce Sterling in 1988, and Snow Crash in 1992. But even before the cyberpunk literature began to be published, there were many works in the 60s new wave science fiction movement that created the foundation of the cyberpunk fiction with their themes of politics, sexual liberation, and environmentalism. This new wave movement in the 60s was less of a hard science, and it is kind of a counter to the typically optimistic writings of the science fiction during the golden age of science fiction in the 40s. So since most cyberpunk literature are in 70s to 80s, cyberpunk can be viewed as how people in the 70s or 80s imagine the future. It reflects a time of rapid technology growth. Japan was becoming an industrial power at that time, and there was a rise of the US financial sector. And that is also why many cyberpunk settings are in New York or in Japan. Apart from the governments and corporations, it also explores the question of what makes us human. This concept of AI appears in early works like Neuromancer and Ghost in the Shell, and it also appears in the more recent ones like Detroit Become Human. The cyberpunk visual that a lot of people think of are neon, large buildings, density, cybernetics, and cyberspace. Examples of early works that incorporate this type of visual are Akira, Blade Runner, Ghost in the Shell, which lead to the newer hyperfluorescent worlds of Cyberpunk 2077, Love, Death and Robots, or Ghost Runner. But these visuals are not just purely visuals without any thoughts or without anything behind it. High skyscrapers and crowded cities show that the government struggles with the building regulations and people can only find opportunities in urban areas. Neon lights are just straightly overwhelming, while large, bright billboards are just the hallmark of consumerism. So if you want to immerse yourself in cyberpunks, here are the starter pack, but if any of you have other favorites you want to share, please do so. Cyberpunk movies are Blade Runner, Ready Player One, which is also a book, and Sleep Dealer. Anime like Ghost in the Shell, Cyber City Odeo 808, Psychopaths, and Serial Experiments Lane. TV series like Altered Carbon, Love, Death and Robot, and Better Than Us. Games like Cyberpunk 2077, Ghost Runner, Detroit Become Human, and Valhalla. And also all the books that I mentioned like Cyberpunk, Neuromancer, Islands in the Net, and Snow Crash. Biopunk. I've seen people mention that Biopunk is cyberpunk, but instead of cybernetics, it's bionetics. I mean, kinda, but there are more differences between cyberpunk and biopunk than that. Biopunk is the answer to the question of what if we have a dystopian society with a focus on biotechnology, genetic engineering, or body augmentation. Visually, Biopunk allows for more gore and horror. It doesn't need to have neon lights and skyscrapers like Cyberpunk. Its setting is more tied to the flesh and cell-inspired structure. In some cases, it could be pure post-apocalyptic kind of setting. But one thing I do agree that these two have in common is that the government must have messed up one big time or given no F whatsoever to companies manipulating human bodies like this. And some biopunk medias that you can get into are movies like Existency, Vesper, Ripperman, games like Resident Evil, Parasite Eve, and Gene's Wars, books Ribbofunk, Starfish, and Dawn by Octavia E. Butler. Now, steampunk, something I'm a bit more familiar with. Similar to cyberpunk, I can't cover every aspect of steampunk in this one punk mashup video, so if you're interested, I would make a separate video just for steampunk. Steampunk is how the Victorians think the future will be instead of people in the 70s or 80s. It's the Industrial Revolution era-based technology, let's say. The main motifs of steampunks are cogs and gears, brass, steam-powered technologies like trains, and something a bit more high-tech like flying ships, automata, or machine dolls. Aside from Victorian era, steampunk also includes the American Civil War and also the American Wild West. K.W. Jeter coined the term cyberpunk to describe his work and the works of Tim Powers and James Blaylock, which were set in the 19th century Victorian times. Unlike cyberpunk, steampunk usually has more positive undertones because it is basically set during the Industrial Revolution, the time when people were optimistic about science. But of course, you can still create a steampunk dystopia. I believe that many works like Clocksmith's Daughter, Clockwork Century, and the Post-Apocalyptic Society, as well as classics like K.W. Jeter's Morlock Knight, took this less optimistic approach. But what makes steampunk stand out so much, in my opinion, is their communities. Initially, people began to dress up in steampunk style at Comic Cons or the Renaissance Fair, but after they appear again and again, they finally have their own events, like the Steampunk World Fairs, the Nimitabel Steampunk Festival, the Halloween Steampunk Festival, and so many more. And here's a quick list to get you into steampunk. There are movies like The Golden Compass, Hugo, and Mortal of Engines, anime like Steamboy and Princess Principal, TV series like Arcane, Wild Wild West, and Manticosa, games like Professor Layton and the Unwound Future, and The Misadventure of P.B. Winterbottom, books like The Steamman of the Prairies, the Steampunk Trilogy, Clockwork Century, Leviathan, The Anubis Gates, Morlock Knight, and Homunculus. And also other books that I mentioned in the dystopian steampunk works, The Cosmist's Daughter and The Post-Apocalyptic Society. And aside from these, I need to mention my favorite musical, The Dolls of New Albion, a steampunk opera. One subgenre that is closely related to steampunk is clockpunk. It is not a very established genre yet, and I think this idea initially came from the commentary that a lot of steampunk visuals focus more on the clock mechanism, the cogs and gears, than the steam engines itself, and that it should be called clockpunk instead of steampunk. It might seem like this is just steampunk without steam, however, what's interesting is that the clock mechanism actually started in the Renaissance era, and some people started to talk about how cool it would be if this clockpunk was based off the Renaissance era instead, and then based the theme on invention sketches of Leonardo da Vinci's. There's already a role-playing game with this concept, which is Gran Meccanismo, clockpunk role-playing in Da Vinci's Florence. Pray look at these artworks. For me, this is so inspiring. So next up we have Dieselpunk, another genre that is closely related to steampunk. I mean, the era is just right after steampunk. Dieselpunk is a speculative science genre based on diesel technology, especially the weaponry in the 1920s interwar period. Sometimes it also includes the World War I and the World War II. The term Dieselpunk was created by two game creators who I don't think they know about each other. The first one is Lovis Pollack. He used it for his role-playing game Children of the Sun. Another person is Anders Blixt for his game Lemuria. Dieselpunks still share the cogs and gears motif, and they also share the vintage outfits, flying ships, and a brown palette. Though I must say Dieselpunk tend to be darker and has more grey tones. The main differences of steampunk and Dieselpunk is already in the name. Steampunk is based on steam and coal, while Dieselpunk is based on petroleum or diesel energy. And also, another difference is that instead of automata or automaton, we've got tin robots in Dieselpunk. Dieselpunk is often darker as it focuses on war, totalitarianism, politics, and also propagandas. Even with that being said, Dieselpunk can actually be categorized into two themes, which are Pycraftian and Hortensian. Pycraftian is basically what we just talked about, the diesel warfare tech-oriented world. It is named after Pycraft, who wrote, analyzed, and established this genre, or this category, in the Gustav Gazette, a steampunk and dieselpunk magazine. The Hortensian theme is more positive. The name is based on Nick Hortens, who is the main ideologist of this theme, and he is the creator of the Gustav Gazette magazine. The Hortensian theme is still the diesel-based energy, because it's still dieselpunk, but its focus is more on the roaring 20s when the World War I has just ended and the Americans have found great economic growth. It was the age of jazz, flappers, and streamlined Art Deco design. Hortensian dieselpunk images often seem so shiny, like everything is unstoppable, and that is why people also call this type of dieselpunk Decopunk instead. And to give you a clearer idea of what a typical dieselpunk looks like, here is the list. Movies like Sucker Punch, The Rocketeer, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow, anime like La Puta, Last Exile, The Big O, and of course, Children of the Sun, Wolfenstein, and Bioshock. There are some dieselpunk books like Dieselpunk by Sean Monaghan, the Warlord of the Air, and the Dieselpunk ePulp Showcase. And by the way, this one is free, like officially free. We had clockpunk, steampunk, and dieselpunk. Now we move on to speculative fiction based on nuclear technology, which is Atompunk. Atompunk explores the future world influenced by the aesthetic and technology of the atomic age during the 1940s to 1960s, the Cold War, and the space race. It combines the retro-futuristic themes, the mid-20th century design, and nuclear technology. When people think of Atompunk, a lot of people would think of Reagan Gothic visual design, which includes objects with sleek, bold designs and also aircrafts and retro-futuristic gadgets and radios. Atompunk visuals often have retro hovercars, robot butlers in houses, and laser guns, and they are usually more dystopian-leaning compared to typical Reagan Gothic, and Raypunk, its similar genre. Another difference between Atompunk and Raypunk is that nuclear technology is often not even the main focus of the Raypunk. Meanwhile, ray guns and aliens are not really necessarily the main motive of Atompunk. For example, in Albion Guide to Analog Consciousness, an Atompunk opera musical, there are eerie space signals, robots, and a bit of dimension travel, but there's nothing explicitly alien or extraterrestrial. But since Atompunk and Raypunk share a lot of similar motifs, and both of them, in my opinion, are not that well established as a fiction genre yet, a lot of people will refer to these two as the same genre or just explain both of them together. In my opinion, Atompunk should be more atomic age focused with some space race theme. I find it quite challenging to find a true dystopian nuclear energy base or Cold War base Atompunk or anything that is not just sci-fi or Reagan Gothic, but there are some. Aside from the New Albion trilogy, Giant Robo, The Day of the Earth Stood Still focuses on the depletion of petroleum resources and the need for the nuclear power. Atomic Heart is a game set in the alternative 1950s Soviet Union. Some others are the Outer Limits series, the Fallout 4 game, Destroy the Humans game, and the Das Nuke book. Other media that some might count as Atompunk, and many people count these as Raypunk or just retro-futuristic fiction, are movies like The First Spaceship on Venus and Barbarella, books like Solar Lottery and the Gernsback Continuum story. Solarpunk is a futuristic world with sustainability technology, renewable energy, harmony with nature, and also community-focused living, which is totally in contrast to cyberpunk capitalism. It was likely coined by an author on the Republic of the Beast in 2008. Aside from the eco-friendly future theme, the Solarpunk visual is a sleek, modern city, often filled with geometric or curved buildings with a lot of plants, and most of the time solar panels and wind turbines. Other elements for its visual are natural fiber clothes, Art Nouveau, and traditional patterns. We have already started to see real-life buildings in this theme like Singapore Botanic Gardens, Italy Bosco Verticale, which a lot of people say that it's actually not that sustainable, Bolivia's neo-Andean architecture by Freddy Mamami, and Paris Metro entrances has this Solarpunk vibes. These are just vibes though, not necessarily saying that these are all eco. Solarpunk is a genre that was kinda pleasantly surprised to see it become more well known, because when I researched this topic around 2 years ago, there's almost nothing for me to read from. But at the same time, it sparks some, fear within me that companies would try to market it like how it markets towards aesthetic or even the thrifting trend, and they might greenwash the Solarpunk. Examples of Solarpunk works are anime like Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, or games like Solarpunk, Loftier, My Time at Portier, and Terranil. And for books, Ecotopia, News from Gardenia, The Fifth Sacred Thing, and short stories in Solarpunk ecological and fantastical stories in a sustainable world, and also Octopia Sign. Solarpunk looks so peaceful and so perfect that I question how sustainable it actually is. So I posted a Tumblr in December 2021 asking, in a utopia-like world like Solarpunk, what else do you think could be problems or obstacles for storytelling? And here are some snippets from amazing answers. The link to the whole thread is in the description. 13 Pythagoras said, racist antagonists, garden pirates, dirty energy monopolists, and oppressive religious extremists. They also mentioned that we do need more Solarpunk fiction. There are 1000 dystopian stories for every Solarpunk term. We don't lack knowledge, but our society does lack imagination. Other examples are a rise in ecofascism, egalitarian versus ecological, interpersonal conflict, and there is still heartbreak in utopia. Yeah, of course. Recently, Solarpunk has this kind of a sister genre called Lunarpunk. It started as Solarpunk at night at first, I think, but now people think of it as a utopian high-tech world, but focuses on spirituality and individualism, something to balance the science and community-based concept of Solarpunk. I think it's like Solarpunk is taking care of the physical things of this world, while Lunarpunk is taking care of people's soul. There's not a lot of Lunarpunk visuals, but the consistent things I can see right now in 2024 are the bioluminescent mushrooms and sometimes animals. To be honest, I don't think it's linked that well with the eco concept. It's cool, but it's just plants and neon. At the same time, it kind of reminds me of the Avatar movies. Other cyberpunk genres. Now that we are done with the famous genres, here are some lesser known ones. I got to start with Rococo Punk, my personal favorite. Actually an idea from a group of people. They have the Rococo Punk Facebook page, by the way. It's not relating to tech like other punk genres, but it is more of Rococo fashion plus punk fashion, like literally. And I really like how they describe this whole thing as class hole. Despite the fact that this genre is still relatively unknown, I actually have quite a number of observations and my personal thoughts to share, but I have to hold that for the next video. Silkpunk is mainly based on East Asian. The term was created by Ken Liu for his book Dandelion Dynasty. He mentioned it as the world that relies on materials of historic importance to people of East Asia and the Pacific Islands like bamboo, shells, coral, paper, silk, feathers, sinew, etc. Other books that could be Silkpunk are The Tea Master and the Detective and Rebel Skies. Hydropunk is a water-based futuristic world. It's a concept that a lot of artists draw inspiration on, but the only thing you can find for now is the Hydropunk game. Neopunk is another term created by someone only to explain their own concept, but after that people are getting more interested in the term. Patrick Ewing, a creative director, called their style Neopunk and mentions the game Neo Cab, where you can play as the taxi driver in a city with self-driving cars. It's not quite cyberpunk, while it looks resembly cyberpunk. It's more of the 21st century and its scenery feels more relatable. Neopunk is like something we can imagine happening right now or not too far from now. Sailpunk focuses on the era of exploration and piracy, featuring pirates, flying ships, and wind power technology. There are a bunch of concept arts in this style, but for movies or any films, Cyan Eye is what I would say is Sailpunk. Scrappunk is about a post-apocalyptic world filled with garbage, robots, rusted scrap metal. Examples of Scrappunk movies are Wall-E, The Book of Eli, and Elysium. Junkertown in the Overwatch game and the game Machinarium could count, and also Alita the Battle Angel manga. And lastly, Splatterpunk. It is actually quite a big genre compared to other genres I mentioned in this section. Splatterpunk is not a speculative science fiction, it's more of a horror. It rebels against the mainstream horror, which has become more tame, let's say. So Splatterpunk is pure gore, more graphic visual type horror literature that shows everything. Books examples, if you want to get into Splatterpunks, are Seeing Red, The Woods Are Dark, and the short story The Autopsy. So basically, cyberpunk derivatives are sets of concepts mostly for speculative future world. Not all of them are well established, and I don't think they need to be. For me, these are just fun concepts for artists, writers, creatives, or even for consumers to take inspiration from. Like, if I'm going to create a sci-fi world based on the 1920s, I don't need to just follow the Dieselpunk tropes or even the Decopunk tropes. I'd rather research the era and develop from that. That would make the story more nuanced. For example, Arcane can be counted as steampunk, but Piltover does not look like a typical steampunk city. It's their own world building. But if you want to fully lean into the genre, I think that would be fun as well. And that is the basics of the cyberpunk genres. If you are interested in hearing more about cyberpunk subgenres, please do tell. And that's it for today. Thank you for being here. I hope to see you on the next journey. Well, if you wonder why I started potentially new video series without finishing the Gothic history one first, I'll let the Arcane 2 announcement take the blame.